Welcome to MacroHive Conversations with Bilal Hafiz. MacroHive helps educate investors and provide investment insights for all markets from crypto to equities to bonds. For our latest views, visit macrohive.com.
Greetings and welcome, Gary. It's fantastic to have you back on the podcast. It's a sign of the times that this is the second time you've been on the podcast this year, and it just tells you how how volatile and unexpected this year has really turned out to be on the US side.
Well, it's good to be back with you, Bilal. And what I say to everyone right now is buckle up.
Great. Now, given how fast events are moving, I just wanted to timestamp our conversation because this will be coming a few days after we record this. So it's Tuesday, the 23rd of July, just in case things happen, between this recording and when we release it. But I suppose the big news over the past few days has been that President Biden has withdrawn his name from being the Democrat nominee for the presidential election. Kamala has been endorsed by him and many others, and she appears to have the required number of delegates. So it appears to be seems like it will be an uncontested process for her to become the sort of top of the ticket as nominee. There are questions around who the VP pick will be, so there's some uncertainty there. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on what's happened over the past few days.
Well, let's go back to the debate in late June. Biden's performance was catastrophic. I'm hard pressed to remember another presidential debate that went so badly for one of the candidates. It was shocking, and I say that as someone who, as listeners to your podcast will know, I've been a big supporter of Biden and thought he was doing many, many good things, especially with the economy and rethinking relationship with states to markets. A lot going on there, and I think he'll be judged as having quite a successful administration. And I was also someone who was saying, let's not judge him simply by his age, because he's shown himself to be capable. He showed himself in that moment not to be capable of running for the president, and that also raises presidency, and that also raises questions about his capacity to do another term. And it took him quite a long time to accept that reality. He finally did. I think the pressure on him to withdraw from the campaign and from the election became overwhelming. And so from my perspective, from last week on, it just became a matter of time as to when he would withdraw. I thought he would wait until after Prime Minister Netanyahu from Israel came to the United States and left, because I thought Biden probably thought he had a piece of unfinished business. And if he knew in his own mind that he was withdrawing from the campaign, he would want that last opportunity to get some leverage over Netanyahu that he's been failing to get. But he did not wait for that. And then the decision came very quickly, without even telling many of his staff. It came over the weekend. And that has brought Kamala Harris to our attention. I think the big question facing the Democrats in light of Biden's withdrawal is whether they would have an open mini primary season lasting about a month. The shape of this, some people have been talking about. Imagine 4 town halls with 4 candidates, one a week before the Democratic National Convention in late August, to give the American people some chance to get to know the candidates. Kamala Harris would clearly be the favorite. Let her test herself against other candidates. The other option was to close ranks around Kamala Harris. And that seems to be what's happening. It's not completely a done deal yet, but it's mostly a done deal. And she has gotten endorsements from most of the heavies in the Democratic Party. It's a safer route. The open mini primary route is higher risk, but also has the potential to carry higher reward. And the Democratic Party has, I think, pretty much decided not to do that. They've had too much chaos over the last month. I began to think differently about an open primary season when Joe Manchin, former Democratic senator from West Virginia, now an independent, announced early yesterday morning that he was becoming a Democrat again and he was going to compete for the nomination. And then I thought, all those people who want an open primary, mini primary season, be careful for what you wish four, because you may not get the four candidates you want to see debate. You may get quite a motley crew that could damage the Democratic Party. So this is the safer route, carries some risks with it, because Kamala Harris did not do well in the 2020 primaries when she was running against Biden and the others. The reports on her from her first year or two in office were not particularly good. I think her public appearances since Biden announced his withdrawal have been very impressive and very good. But she's got to be tested in a way she's never been tested before, and she's never won when she's been at the top of a ticket. She has never won a gubernatorial race. Obviously, she hasn't won a presidential race. So she's got to be tested in new ways. And she's also got to pose very fresh and different kinds of challenges for Trump. So it's going to be a very interesting, and I expect, volatile election season with many twists and turns.
And in terms of historical precedent for this, some people have referenced 1968 when LBJ, as a sitting president, stood down, before an election. And then I think there's some late 1800s reference point that some people have made. I mean, are those fair comparisons, or is it just so unprecedented what we're seeing right now?
Well, the closest precedent would be 1968. Lyndon Johnson was in office planning to run for re-election in 1968. He had been an enormously popular president with his reform agenda on civil rights, and then he allowed himself to be drawn deeply into a terrible and very unpopular war, Vietnam. And there was a peace candidate named Eugene McCarthy, a no-name senator from Minnesota, who almost beat Johnson in New Hampshire. Came out of the blue, shocking development. That was in February 1968. Johnson made the decision to withdraw at the end of March 1968. So there is a kind of precedent. He wasn't doing it for reasons of ill health. He was doing it because he felt the war had become so unmanageable for him that he was no longer fit to lead the country. It was it did not make him more popular, but it's an interesting decision on his part that he was, in a sense, putting country ahead of his own vanity. But there was a lot more time left in that primary season. Eugene McCarthy was a candidate. Bobby Kennedy had entered the race. There was time for Democratic Party voters to have a chance to get to know who the alternatives to LBJ were going to be, and to have some sense of voting for someone whom they wanted. They are not being given the chance this time, as it seems from this point of view. And it's also, of course, much later in the season. One of the eerie coincidences of this election season with 1968 is that the convention is once again in Chicago, as it was in 1968. And there's a segment of the Democratic Party on fire about Israel, Palestine, the war, and the destruction of Gaza. And there are plans developing for massive demonstrations in the streets of Chicago for that convention, which would echo the demonstrations of the anti-war protesters of 1968. And one of the questions now is, will Kamala Harris, is assuming the top spot, less of a closer identification with Israel? Will that moderate some of those protests and give the Democratic Party an easier path to coronating her at the convention? But Chicago 2024, Chicago 1968, that parallel is still in play and bears watching.
And just from a procedural perspective, it appears, as of the time of this recording, that Kamala has secured enough pledged delegates to take her over the line to get the nomination. Is there something at the convention that could happen if there are these protests or other events happening that could somehow cause her nomination to unravel? Maybe not necessarily just at the convention, even before that, when they do that virtual roll call that they're talking about.
Well, I think it's less likely that we are going to be shocked at the convention that this will come out of the blue. I think what's a more likely scenario, or not likely, but a possible scenario, is that she stumbles between now and the convention in some way, or some part of her past emerges that hadn't been known, that causes her trouble so that some of the pledged delegates reconsider their pledge to her. They still have to cast their votes their delegate votes at the convention itself. A pledge is not an actual vote. It's what the term means. It's a pledge to vote in a certain direction. And if the perception is that the campaign is not going well and imperiling the chances of the Democrats succeeding in November, then it's possible we might see a genuinely open convention, a challenge from another candidate, which would make the convention itself and the fight on the floor the ultimate arbiter of whether she's going to become the nominee of the Democratic Party. So the matter is not going to be settled until the convention itself. There's also the money issue, and we have not been through this before because the United States has not been through this before because the money rules that currently apply didn't really apply in the same way in 1968. But who has access to Biden's funds that he's raised already? It's pretty unproblematic for Kamala Harris to claim those funds as hers because she's on the ticket. If a candidate were to come in at a very late stage, there would be a question of whether the funds earmarked for Biden-Harris could be transferred to another candidate. There probably likely would be a procedure for doing that, but it could also get quite messy. So there's also the financial element of this. And as most of your listeners know, American elections cost enormous amounts of money and cannot be run without endless sources of funds. And so if a big source of funds ends up being sequestered because there's talk of a nominee, the nominee being someone else, finances could come into play as well.
And before talking a bit more about Kamala's platform and so on, I wanted to ask about her VP pick. That's the one thing we don't know yet. Number one, is your VP pick significant or not? And the second one is the names that have been put forward, they're all white men from swing states, which I assume is to kind of offset the fact that she's a woman of color. But first, is it significant? And then if so, does it matter who she picks then?
I think the vice presidential candidate is going to be very important, and vice presidents are often chosen because of their ability to pick up a chunk of the electoral pie. The Trump's choice of Vance as his VP candidate from Ohio signified several things, but one of them was the understanding that the key battleground states are going to be Midwestern states, not Ohio actually, but Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And both Trump and Vance in their acceptance speeches for the nominations were referencing these Midwestern states a lot. So there's an argument for choosing someone from the Midwest, and there are able candidates there. Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, Gretchen Whitmer, governor of Michigan, J.B. Pritzker, governor of Illinois. Those would be the three leading choices. And I think Josh Shapiro and Gretchen Whitmer in particular would help enormously grab those Midwestern states for the Democratic column. There's also an argument for, I've heard Mark Kelly, another white man, but from Arizona, senator from Arizona. Arizona is going to be an important battleground state as well. And he represents a more moderate wing of the party than Biden and those other governors represent. And so there may be an argument for going with him. It also should be said that Josh Shapiro is Jewish. Gretchen Whitmer obviously is a woman. It bears saying that no woman has ever been elected to the presidency of the United States. One African-American has, Barack Obama, but there was an enormous backlash against him during his second term, a lot of it grounded in race. So Harris is going to have to overcome anti-woman and anti-Black sentiment within the American population, and I'm sure that's going to factor into her choice, and that argues for choosing a vice president who is perceived as safely white. I should say J.B. Pritzker is also Jewish. So a black and a Jew on a presidential ticket, I'd like to think that could work and people wouldn't really care, but America is America, and that's going to be part of the discussions in the back rooms.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some other names as Roy Cooper and also Andy Bashir, some of the other names as well.
Bashir from Kentucky,
yeah. I have to say that Mark Kelly chap, I mean, he's a former astronaut and fighter pilot, and he certainly has some of the sort of macho credentials that may appeal to certain.
He does, and his wife is Gabby Giffords, who was a shooting victim when she was in Congress, and it would also be strengthen the gun control and law and order part of the ticket. I mean, one of the things that Harris could use effectively in her campaign is her experience as a prosecuting attorney. And I think this is part of the planning and strategy that's going on now, able to highlight what it means for a political party to have a nominee who's a convicted felon who has all these other charges pending against him. And I think Mark Kelly strengthens her even more, her credentials in that regard. So early days, I mean, right, Kamala Harris found out 72 hours ago that she'd be the likely nominee. So we're still in the early stages of this, but her vice presidential appointment is going to be very important, and it needs to be someone who can communicate with portions of the American electorate that might be very suspicious of Harris herself.
And in terms of what Kamala brings to the table that's different from Biden, beyond the identity aspect, she's younger, she's a woman, black, and so on. Ideologically, is she different from Biden? I mean, and then which demographic will she be able to get that Biden wasn't able to? So I guess two questions here. One is sort of policy differences between Biden. Is it a continuity candidate? And second, in terms of popularity and appeal.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how she aligns or de-aligns from Biden in terms of policy. It's difficult to call, because I would say the profile of Biden and Harris over their careers until Biden became president were quite similar. I would characterize both of them as moderate Democrats, not super liberal Democrats, not super conservative Democrats, middle of the road. I guess what's striking about Harris is that as a African American, the fact that she had built her career as a prosecuting attorney and not as a defense attorney is a very significant statement about her, and not just a prosecuting attorney, but as Attorney General of the state of California. And if you look at some of her early writings and her concern about crime and her concern about citizen safety, and she still is what I would call a moderate Democrat. She's not someone whom progressives immediately embrace. I think a very similar profile to Biden in that regard. What's interesting about Biden is that when he was running for the presidency as the nominee, he grasped the moment that he was in, and he understood that the policies of Obama and Clinton, what I've called the neoliberal policies of Obama and Clinton, that you put the market first, that you restrain the reach of government, that you go for globalization, that you really let markets provide the important signals on the economy. He grasped that was no longer working, that the emergence of Trump on the right and Sanders on the left had signified a very different moment in American politics. And one of the most striking aspects of his campaign is that his people sat down with the Sanders people already in the summer of 2020, 6 task forces to develop policies for the Biden administration. Probably the most significant dialogue between the center and left of the Democratic Party that had occurred at least since the 1960s and maybe since the 1930s. And out of that came the massive infrastructure bill, the $5 trillion Build Back Better bill, which was not successful, but a portion of that was the greatest green energy investment in American history, the reshoring of chips manufacture, So Biden, on becoming president, veered left and entered into a dialogue with these left sectors of the Democratic Party. And one of the curious sights of the past month, when so many Democrats were abandoning Biden, there were Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez standing with him, saying we must not abandon him. Why? Because in the waning hours of his presidency, he made a deal with them to push even harder on the left agenda that they wanted. So they agreed, if he pushed that agenda, to stand by him. It was a very curious sight to see these two politicians stand by him at that moment. And one of the questions that's going to pertain to Harris is to what extent she's going to continue this left-center rapprochement in the Democratic Party, and to what degree she's going to revert to what I think were her more natural, moderate political instincts. One of the aspects of the 2020 campaign that was interesting is that as she tried to don a more progressive suit of progressive policies for herself, she looked increasingly uncomfortable, which suggests that she might want to run to a greater comfort zone, which might be somewhat more moderate than Biden. On the other hand, she's going to have to please important Biden constituencies in this regard. This story, too, is just beginning. She's going to have to feel her way. I do expect her to strike a somewhat different tone on some of Biden's policies, while also making clear that she will be his legitimate heir. So
Okay.
it's going to be an interesting story to watch.
And then if we move over to the Republican side in Trump, obviously from the debate onwards, he's had a resurgence in popularity in the polls. Then there was the assassination attempt. We recently had the RNC convention in Milwaukee. What are your thoughts on his his path since then?
Well, I think the Republicans had a very successful convention. If we measure it by a metric of unity, probably the most unified they've been since Trump first appeared on the scene. And unity, of course, means it's on Trump's terms. This is completely Donald Trump's party now. I think the assassination attempt and his survival and the way he behaved in the immediate aftermath, having the presence of mind to say, wait before you take me off the stage. I've got something to do. And he raises his fists in defiance, and his religious followers, this strengthened their belief that he's blessed by God and a providential instrument among his core believers. This strengthened him enormously. And I think he has now been successful in making the political party entirely his own. I think the Vance decision to go for Vance on the vice presidency was a big gamble on his part, but we know him to be something of a gambler. It was a bold move, as if to say, this party's mine. And just to demonstrate that this party's mine, I'm going to demonstrate that I have no need to reach out to a different constituency as I go into the general election. I'm going to double down on who I am. I'm going to double down on MAGA. I'm going to pick the most enthusiastic supporter for MAGA in the Senate as my running mate. And this is going to be our message very loud and clear. It remains to be seen whether this gamble pays off for him. I think he did not yet believe that Biden was going to withdraw from the race. And now that the race, he might regret not picking someone who could soften him on issues that he needs softening on. Vance is hard anti-abortion. And you can believe that Kamala Harris is going to press the abortion issue extremely, extremely hard. And I think some Republicans are already wondering whether Marco Rubio or Burgum from North Dakota or the Virginia governor, Youngkin, with all Republicans who carry some weight with swing independent voters in the suburbs, whether that might not have been a safer choice. Vance is interesting in terms of his own politics. His emergence as a figure of national scope signifies that the economic populism that Trump introduced to the party has real staying power and is going to stay after the moment that Trump dies or finally leaves the political stage. And by economic populism, I mean the effort to refashion the Republican Party as an instrument of the working man. I say working man rather than working men and women, working man, to craft the party so it serves the interests of Main Street rather than Wall Street. The attacks on Wall Street and Vance's acceptance speech were, to me, the most shocking element of that, given how deeply connected the Republican Party has been to Wall Street. Now, in his speech, he spared Silicon Valley. He spared the tech bros from criticism, but I can't help but feel that his attacks on Wall Street made his supporters in Silicon Valley, most notably Peter Thiel, who's been a big backer of Vance, made them feel nervous. So the question is this populist rhetoric simply rhetorical for popular consumption? Or is Vance actually quite serious about this? I think it's a little bit of both. I don't think Trump cares. I don't think Trump is if I'm on Wall Street or in Silicon Valley, I'm not worried about Trump as president. I would be somewhat worried about Vance because there is a formation in the Republican Party. We can begin to see its outlines now that has in its corner several senators. Marco Rubio is one. Josh Hawley is another. Tom Cotton from Arkansas is a third. Vance is a fourth. They're all skeptical of globalization. They think free trade has been a disaster for the working men of America. They want to restore the working man to pride. And if that means choosing Main Street over Wall Street and Silicon Valley, I think there's some readiness in their ranks to do it. They have public policy intellectuals now who are developing the case for that. I think of someone like Orrin Cass, who edits American Compass, or I think of someone like Julius Krein, who edits American Affairs. There's a group in formation that is worlds away from the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan that wants to bury free trade and the commitment of the Republican Party to free trade, open borders, let markets decide everything. They are nationalists, and they are nationalists not simply in terms of America's interests in the world, but they want to put the nation and the most worthy people in the nation first. And those most worthy people are, in their rhetoric, working men and their families. And this also has an ethno-cultural inflection. They tend to be white men and their families. But this is a quite significant and serious development in the Republican Party. I don't know if it's going to matter in this campaign, but it's something that bears watching through this election and in the years beyond.
I also note Vance apparently seems to be a fan of Lina Khan, which is kind of an odd, endorsement, that, or also, odd kind of choice you'd think for a Republican. But she's obviously been attacking big tech, trying to talk about their monopolistic, attributes.
Yes, and he's also working with Elizabeth Warren on regulating the big banks. Another unlikely couple. Josh Hawley is also a fan of Lina Khan. I would love to be a fly on the rooms where the tech corporations gather to discuss what they want to do. And there has been a group of Silicon Valley investors, magnates, who have gone over to the Republican Party and Trump in a big way in the last several months. And I think that is related to the intensification of Lina Khan's attacks on the tech giants. And what I have not been able to understand is what Vance tells Peter Thiel to reassure him that if he's reelected, that a Lina Khan won't survive in that office, but that a Lina Khan lookalike won't be the Republican nominee for the next head of the Federal Trade Commission. I wonder what that discussion is like in the back rooms. And maybe Vance is just saying to Thiel, don't worry, Donald will take care of this. You have nothing to worry about. But there are clearly, underneath all the rhetoric and all the volatility, there's some changes in the configuration of parties and their platforms that is going on in the United States right now and will continue to develop regardless of what happens in this election.
Actually, just if we focus on that a bit more, from a historic perspective, how would you kind of characterize sort of party alignments and different sort of forms of party systems? It seems like there was the sort of neoliberal order, you could say, that Reagan instituted, and then Clinton, Obama, as you say, kind of followed. So there was this kind of realignment around that. And then since Trump, you could say there's been another potential realignment that's been developing since then. Is that a fair characterization? And if so, what is this new alignment? Where do you think we're going to land, on that? And then what does left versus right mean? What does conservative, progressive? I mean, what do all of these terms mean now?
It's hard to know because we're in a state of volatility. It's important to note that there have been historic changes in the allegiance of certain constituencies. The Republican Party used to be the party of Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln. And by that, I mean, it used to be the party of African-American emancipation. And from the 1860s to the 1930s, vast majorities of African-Americans, if they were allowed to vote at all in the United States, were voting for the Republican Party. And only in the 1930s and 40s do they begin to turn the picture of Lincoln that was hanging up in their kitchen, the great emancipator. Only then did they begin to turn it to the wall. Whereas the Democratic Party had been the party of white supremacy and the guarantor of segregation in the South. And all that dissolves in the 1950s and 60s. And the Republican Party becomes the party of the white South. And the Democratic Party had always been the party of the urban North. But with the movement of African Americans from South to North, they also become the party of civil rights, the party aggressively promoting racial equality in America. And so it's no accident that Barack Obama is he the first president of Illinois since Abraham Lincoln? It's fitting that that this Black president in the tradition of Lincoln is coming out of the Democratic Party and not the Republican Party. So his profound changes in constituency do happen, but they don't happen very often. And there are incipient signs that it's beginning to happen now, but I think it's too soon in the process for us to know for sure. We know that Trump at the edges has been taking minority support that had gone overwhelmingly to the Democrats, especially among young Black men, young Latino men, especially. There is more support for Trump than there was in 2016. Something is going on there. We also know that much more so than in the past, your educational level has become determinative of how you're going to cast your vote. And so increasingly, the Democratic Party is the party of the university-educated portion of America, and the Republican Party is becoming the party of the high school, secondary school portion of America. So whether you went to university or not, and now has become a very big predictor of which party you're going to affiliate with. And this has to be regarded as very troubling for the Democratic Party, because at least since the 1930s, they have been the party of the working class. And now increasing slices of the working class, especially the white working class, have gone over to the Republican Party. The big question hanging over the Republican Party is when push comes to shove and they have to decide between their working class supporters and their moneyed supporters, between Main Street and Wall Street. Are they really going to come down on the side of Main Street against Wall Street? I'll believe it when I see it. I haven't seen it yet. And if we look at, Trump's policies in office, his one great legislative achievement was the corporate tax cut, the big omnibus tax bill that had a big corporate tax cut as part of it, and also cut the taxes on the wealthiest ranks of Americans. Very little in his administration for working class Americans that improved their material lives. Most of what he gave to working class Americans was to honor a sense of cultural marginalization that they have been experiencing as America has been becoming a much more multicultural society. So cultural dividends, not economic dividends, went to the working class. Is that sustainable? Can you continue to buy off working class people through cultural rhetoric and cultural policies without materially improving their lives? And if you want to materially improve their lives, do you have to move against Wall Street and the elite constituencies that for so long have been so integral to the Republican Party? All I could do now is pose that question. I can't answer it, but it's a question that certainly bears watching. Not in this election cycle. It's not going to be resolved in this election cycle, but over the next 10 years. I should say also that this reconfiguration of electorates is happening in other countries and in other ways. So in Britain, the Labour Party faces a similar dilemma in the sense that many more of their supporters are now coming from the educated classes. And the next to last election demonstrated that the red wall in the north of Britain went heavily for the Tories, which suggests that the Tories have the capacity to make deep inroads into traditional working class constituencies. And another development that has to be watched is the behavior and the attitudes of the young. And there is now data to indicate confidence in democracy plummets with age. So the younger you are in the global north, the more skeptical you are about democracies actually working and being able to deliver something good for your country. And so we can't blame the rise in authoritarianism simply on the old, of people feeling things are getting out of hand or being replaced. It's among the young too, who've grown up in the 21st century. And if you ask what are the great democratic achievements of the 21st century, well, we have trouble making a long list. And so they become quite skeptical of democracy. And so we're also facing perhaps a reconfiguration of the old versus the young in terms of how they align in terms of their confidence in democratic procedures and democratic polities. And this is another trend and tendency that bears watching. Again, it's not going to be decided in this election, but over the next 10 to 15 years.
And, I mean, just to bring it closer to the here and now, is there anything you've seen from Trump, J.D. Vance, the convention, any policy pronouncements from the Republicans to suggest that the Trump administration will be different to what we saw in his first administration in 2016?
Well, it depends where you look. Trump supporters and policy wonks have developed this massive volume that runs to 800 pages, Project 2025, about everything that the second Trump administration is going to accomplish that the first did not. Some of those talking points are familiar. Mass deportations of running into the hundreds of thousands and maybe even millions from the United States, a complete dismantling of what they regard as the deep state, the administrative state, to deprive the federal state of the capacity to regulate the economy meaningfully in the public interest, going hard on stocking the judiciary with very conservative and in some cases right-wing justices. And we can see already what the effects of Trump's appointments in his last term, how impactful they have been on policy and politics in America. So if you believe that manifesto, the tone of that manifesto is that we meaning the Trump supporters, were frustrated. We could not accomplish what we wanted to in the first term. We did not have the administrators who were really committed to our view of the world. We are ready now. We have experience. We have expertise. We have the people to manipulate the levers of government, the instruments of governance in our favor. And oh my God, are we going to clean up? And are we going to show what we can do? It's a real radical, almost revolutionary manifesto. Now, you heard no talk of that or hardly any talk of that at the Republican convention, because I think Trump realized that this could imperil his chances for the presidency. The more better known this project becomes, the worse chances his presidency might have. And also, in all kinds of ways, we know that his ideological commitments don't run very deep on many issues, and he's willing to look away, or he gets bored and his attention gets grabbed by something else. So he may not follow through on that. Now, if the subtext of your question is he going to be a more mature politician this time around? Can he take satisfaction in having returned himself to the White House? Is he going to be more magnanimous than he has been in the past? Is he going to be interested in ruling for all of America instead of just part of America? Is he going to restrain some of his egocentric tendencies? One can hope for that, but until I see it, I think what defines Trump is the power of his personality and the power of his way of doing politics. And I have not seen, he tried to be a different kind of Trump in the first 20 minutes of his acceptance speech, talking about the assassination attempt on him. And I would say the next 70 minutes were less harsh than many things he said in the past. But as soon as he hit the campaign trail, he was back to the old Trump. And I think I expect the campaign against Harris to be quite vicious. A lot will depend too on if he wins, how long his coattails are, whether he's elected president, but the voters of America hand the House and or the Senate to the Democrats as a kind of insurance against Trump getting too out of hand, or whether he wins along with the Republican House and Senate, and then he's got to have carte blanche to pretty much do what he wants. I think another argument for getting Harris in there as the nominee is a recognition that even if she loses in November, the chances of down ticket Democrats, meaning those running for the House, running for the Senate, the chances of them succeeding are much better under Harris than they would have been under Biden. Working for Biden was like being on a death march to November. And you can see the enthusiasm that has suddenly been released in Democratic ranks. And I don't know if that enthusiasm is going to be enough to carry Harris to the presidency, but that enthusiasm and the money that comes with it may be enough to secure one or both houses of Congress for the Democrats. And if that happens, that's going to constrain Trump, and the Congress becomes ever more important as a form of constraint as the judiciary, given its current makeup, is less and less able or less and less willing to control and contain him.
And just on the darker side of a potential second Trump administration, obviously Trump has been very upset about being indicted and charged with all of these different felonies and so on. Is there a risk that if he was to come into power, he'll then go after his political opponents in a similar, in using kind of the judiciary in different forms?
Yes, absolutely. I think he's never really understood the form of government that America has, or he understands it now, but he doesn't like it. The foundation of American government, going back to the Constitution, is separation of powers. And the separation of powers is, the principle is that you divide the power that the federal government has into several wings so that no single branch of government can get too much power onto itself and become a center of tyranny and autocracy. This is fundamental to how the American Republic was set up. That makes no sense to Trump. He doesn't want to live in that world. He can't live in that world. He just doesn't understand why Congress and the court should not be instruments of his personal will. If you ask what kind of ruler is he, he's a monarch. And if he wants all power unto himself, and if he has all power unto himself, he's capable of being gracious in certain moments to certain people. But the foundation of his view of government is that power should lie within him, and whatever power lies outside of him should be through his benevolence and his willingness to temporarily delegate. This is who he is, and he wanted desperately, we saw in the waning days of his first term, to make the Justice Department an instrument of his will. He wanted, and in contesting the election, even though dozens of courts threw his lawsuits against the election out, didn't stop him. He just doesn't accept a state of affairs where the courts, the legislatures, are not instruments of his will. And so to understand Trump, I think we have to understand him as a would-be monarch. That's what we would be facing. And if he's elected again, democracy in America has, as it has been practiced, it's going to be under severe strain.
Okay. Now, one final question. In financial markets, everybody's assuming that Trump and the Republicans will win the presidency. Similar with prediction markets as well, and polling suggests that as well. Is there a path for the Democrats to win the presidency between now and the elections? I mean, is that possible at all or not? And if so, like what types of things will we need to see for that to happen?
Is it possible? Absolutely. I think anyone who thinks this election is wrapped up in Trump's favor is making a big mistake. Kamala Harris becoming the nominee improves the party's chances, does not hurt it. It's important to remember that Trump has never won a majority of votes from the American people when he's run for president. His hardcore base, deeply committed to him, is somewhere between 30 to 35% of the electorate, which means that in order for him to win, even as a minority president, by minority president, I mean getting a less than half of the popular vote, he's going to have to appeal to moderate Republicans, independents who have not made up their mind about whom they're going to vote for. And I think these moderates and independents are going to be open to appeals from Kamala Harris, whereas they had written Joe Biden off. And people I know in this world have been telling me for weeks now that there's no chance they would vote for Biden. And I find them now, I'm in conversation with them because they live outside my bubble. So they provide me with an important stream of information that doesn't come through my bubble naturally. And they're saying they're very intrigued with Kamala Harris. So it's up to her to, in the next couple months, to put together a case that's going to attract these people and pull them hard into the Democratic side and into the Democratic fold. I think it's an uphill struggle, but I think the Democrats have a better chance now than they did last week at this time. And I think it's going to be a fiercely fought election. I think the Democrats are usually disadvantaged in the Electoral College. It's a system that's stacked against them. But they also know how it works and what states they have to win. They're going to have to be very smart strategically. And Kamala Harris is going to have to do well. And I hope she, in the general election, she inhabits the more moderate persona that was hers before she decided she had to change in the 2020 election. She has to be something that she really is. And I think being something that she really is gives the Democrats a chance for victory. Also, even though this has been completely shut out of political conversation in the last few weeks, and the Republicans are doing everything they can to keep it out of the conversation, abortion, women's reproductive freedom, control of their own bodies is going to be a huge issue in this election. And I think the Trump-Vance team is very vulnerable on that score. And Kamala Harris is well placed to attack the Republican ticket at a very weak point. So if you're asking me, can the Democrats win? Yes, they can, but it's going to be an uphill struggle, and the Democrats are going to have to perform very, very well.
Okay, that's great. I mean, you've covered a lot of ground. I'm sure a lot will change, not just between now and the election, but even in the coming few weeks. What's the best way for people to follow you, if that's possible?
They can follow me on Twitter at GLGerstle, GERSTLE. I write for various journals. I'm on various podcasts. They can go to my webpage, which is www.GaryGerstle.com.
Great, excellent. So thanks a lot, Gary. As always, it's been very informative, and let's see how all of this unfolds.
Thanks for having me, and expect more surprises before this election is ultimately decided.
Thanks for listening to the episode. Please subscribe to the podcast show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave a 5-star rating, a nice comment, and let other people know about the show. We'd be super grateful. Finally, sign up for our free newsletter at macrohive.com/free. That's macrohive.com/free. We'll be back soon, so tune in then.